Hi, this is Chris Monk at Highline Guitars, and you're watching episode 54 from the Luthier's Workbench. In this episode, I think what I want to talk about is buffing machines, polishing and buffing. I'm not really going to get into the specifics about the techniques I use, and I'm not really going to tell you exactly how I built this buffing machine because I've talked about that in previous videos. What I'm going to talk about is the things that your mama never told you about buffing. I don't know if you've noticed this. I have, but over the years that I had been building guitars, I learned that a lot of the tricks and some of the basic knowledge that we acquire is stuff that's not necessarily written in books. It's not on the internet. It's not on any instructional DVDs or anything like that. It's almost as if it's a secret and you've got to learn it through experience. And sometimes I think it's because people just are too lazy to share all the very minute details. But years ago, when I decided I wanted to achieve the highest possible gloss finish on guitars that I was clear coating, I decided that I was going to need to get a buffing machine. I figured that's really the only way that you can achieve that kind of finish. However, that's not entirely true. What I learned was you can get the same high gloss, scratch-free, swirl-free finish by hand using rags or foam buffing pads as you can with a buffing machine. The difference is a buffing machine is faster. It works much quicker, and that's really all the way through the whole finishing process. The idea with the buffing machine is you can eliminate a lot of steps and therefore get to a high gloss finish a lot faster than if you were to do it by hand. In fact, when I'm using a high gloss finish on a guitar, the way I'll achieve it is after I finish spraying the final clear coat of lacquer, I'll let it sit until it's cured, but then when I go back to wet sand or to level sand, I'll do so with just one grit of sandpaper. I'll use like a 1200 to 1500 grit, and I'll sand the surface smooth, and then I can come right to the buffer, buff it out on a coarse compound, then buff it out on a fine compound. Takes me maybe 30-45 minutes and I've got that high gloss finish. There's really nothing to it. If I'm going to buff by hand, which I really don't do that much anymore, you've got to start out at like a 600 grit sandpaper and then work your way all the way up to 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 grit. And I know a lot of people who use micro mesh papers and go all the way to 12,000. Then you can buff it out. That's a lot of work and it's very time consuming. But if you're building just one guitar or just doing finishes occasionally, that process works just fine. However, if you are trying to do a lot of guitars or you're a really busy shop and time is of the essence, you really have to go with the buffing machine. So obviously there comes that time when you start to look at these things and wonder if that's something you ought to bring into your shop. And the problem is, to my knowledge, there's only two dedicated pedestal buffing machines on the market that work well for luthiers. One is sold by Stewart MacDonald, and that one's probably that's really the Ferrari of buffing machines. And then there's another one from Caswell Plating, which is about half the price, but it's still a pretty good machine. And what I'll do is I'll put links down in the description below. Just click the show me text and you'll see what I'm talking about. But you can also make your own buffing machine, which is what I did. I just took a 3rd horsepower motor, a couple of pillow block bearings, a threaded steel rod, some pulleys, some jam nuts, flanges, and I put a pair of, I believe these are cat and flannel wheels on each side. There's 2 of them on each side. And this works pretty well. But here's what your mama never told you. And this is what I never saw anybody talk about anywhere. It was never in any books. It was never, on the internet or anything. The machine itself, the mechanics of it are pretty much simple to use and relatively maintenance free. You've got to sometimes grease up the bearings, but that's about it. However, what is what does require maintenance are the buffing wheels. And like I said, I've got 4 buffing wheels here, 2 on each side. These are 12-inch diameter wheels. Now you're probably looking at this one thinking, no, that's not 12 inches. It isn't. It's about 9 inches. But this is kind of what I'm talking about. In order for a buffing machine to work properly, you have to care and maintain the wheels. It means you got to clean them fairly frequently. And I use, a buffing rake to get out the little chunks of polishing compound that build up on the surface over time. And then I also will take a pair of sharp scissors and I'll trim off some of the loose fibers that stick out. And this, I do this almost before every guitar or every couple of guitars. It's really important to do that because if you don't care for the wheels, you'll start to notice that no matter how hard you try to polish your guitars, there's still going to be a lot of very fine scratches that you just can't get rid of. And that defeats the purpose of these. So you have to maintain these wheels and take care of them. And the thing is because you have to rake them and trim them, plus just merely using them reduces their diameter over time. And I find that when you start getting down around 8, 9 inches in diameter, it's time to replace the wheels. So obviously, when you think about owning a buffing machine, you have to take into consideration the fact that you're going to have to replace these wheels periodically. I find that they typically, for me, they last about 30 guitars, and then I've got to replace them. Interestingly enough, though, the compounds that I use, this is the stick compounds from Meguiar, and I use a brown, a yellow, and a tan, and they tend to last about the same length of time. So usually after about 30 to 40 guitars, I've got to buy new sticks and I've got to buy new wheels. So if you're going to build your own buffing machine, you've got to take into consideration the fact that you're going to be replacing these wheels periodically. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to try to find a supplier of buffing wheels that's reasonably priced, because you are going to go through them. And, having this idea of building this really hot rod buffing machine with 16-inch wheels, and that's going to mean considerable expense every time you have to replace those buffing wheels. So before you go down that path, think about that, and then think about your volume and how much you're finishing. And that's going to kind of help you to decide whether to stick with just hand polishing or step up to a machine like this. So those are just a few of the things that you need to know about the cost of operating one of these machines. Now I'm going to show you a slightly different technique for polishing and buffing that I like to use quite a bit. In fact, I'm starting to use it more than I use my buffing machine. So if you don't want to build your own buffing machine and can't afford to buy a freestanding pedestal buffer like the one from Stewart Mac or Caswell Plating, another possibility is to use these Automotive polishing pads. They come in different coarseness grades, and they're all color coded. This is a medium. I also have a fine. And what they're designed to do is they're designed to be used with a random orbital auto polishing tool. And you could use one of those if you want to, but I prefer just to use my drill press. If I was going to use the random orbital auto polisher, I would have to figure out a way to clamp it to my work table so that I could hold the guitar while I'm polishing it. I could use, hold the auto polisher and then set the guitar on the table, but I would have to make sure that I clamp it down, which is going to restrict access to the body as I'm polishing it. But with my drill press, I just chuck in one of these. This is just a Velcro backed 5-inch diameter sanding pad. And I just attach it. And then I set my drill press to run at the slowest speed that it can run. Any faster, I find that I run the risk of burning the finish, but at a slow speed, it works pretty well. And then I'll start out by I'll apply a little bit of rubbing compound to the surface of the guitar, and I'll do just, sections at a time, and then I'll just run it under here as it's turning, and it very quickly will polish out the scratches left by my 12 to 1500 grit sandpaper. And then once I've done the entire guitar body with the rubbing compound, I'll switch to my fine wheel, and or my fine pad, and I'll use some Swirl Remover. And at that point, I have got a perfect mirror gloss shine without any scratches. I mean, even the finest scratches, and no swirl marks. It works fantastic. As far as the compounds go, I don't have it around me, but what I use is Meguiar's, and I start with the blue coarse pad. I use Meguiar's 105 cutting compound. Then I switch to the I have another pad around here. It's a medium pad, and I'll use Meguiar's 205, which is a little bit less abrasive. And then I'll finish up with this black pad, and I'll use some Meguiar's ultrafine polishing compound. And at that point, it's completely swirl-free, scratch-free, and it looks fantastic. It's not as fast as using my pedestal buffer. There's no question about it. It does take a little bit longer. And the main reason it does is because after after using the 105 coarse cutting compound, you have to let the body cool a little bit, and then you've got to take a damp rag and wipe off all the residue from the polishing compound, and then go back and do the same with the 105 and then the Swirl Remover. You have to make sure you keep the area clean that you're working, because you don't want to cross-contaminate your grits and everything. So that all takes a little bit more time than it takes to use the big buffing machine. But since I'm not typically polishing dozens of guitars at a time, I don't have any problem just using this one. But I say that now, but once I get a new set of wheels for my big buffer, I'll probably just go back to that. But that is a great alternative, and I'll put links to all this stuff down in the description below so that you can go check it out yourself. But that's just some of my thoughts on the dark art of buffing and polishing. So we'll see you next time in episode 55.